Yes.
Hi folks, thank you for joining us. We're here celebrating Melissa Chadburn's A Tiny Upward Shove. Give it up for Melissa. Joining us online as well. We're very happy to have you. While we're here, go ahead and let us know where you're tuning in from. We would love to know. I think that's a cool part of the Zoom universe is that we get to all be here together in very disparate parts of the world. So let's see where everyone's tuning in from. We're also joined tonight by Jonathan Escoffery. I'm very excited to have Jonathan here in conversation with Melissa. Very brief bios for both of our authors, and they're going to have a reading and conversation, and we'll get to an audience Q&A at the end of the night. So that goes for you too, online audience. If you have any questions, please do enter them into the Q&A portion that we have here. So first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Jonathan Escoffery, who is the recipient of the 2020 Plimpton Prize for Fiction, 2020 National Endowment for the Arts and Literature Fellowship, and many other accolades. His fiction has appeared in the Paris Review, Prairie Schooner, Ziziva, and more, and has been anthologized in the Best American Magazine writing. He received his MFA from the University of Minnesota. He's a PhD fellow in the University of Southern California's PhD in Creative Writing and Literature program, and in 2021 was awarded a Wallace Stegner Fellowship in Creative Writing at Stanford. His debut book, which you can pre-order here, small plug, you can pre-order Jonathan's book here, will be published in September 2022, and it's titled If I Survive You. Please do give it up for Jonathan Stockery. And last but certainly not least, Melissa Chadburn's writing has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times Book Review, New York Review of Books, and the Paris Review Daily, and many other publications. Her extensive reporting on the child welfare system appears in Netflix docuseries, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. Chadburn is a worker, lover, and through her own labor and literary citizenship strives to upend economic violence. Let's hear it for that. Her mother taught her how to sharpen a pencil with a knife, and she's basically been doing that ever since. She's a PhD candidate in creative writing at the University of Southern California and lives in Greater Los Angeles. She's joining us tonight in San Francisco, and we are here to celebrate her book, A Tiny Upward Shove. Let's give it up for Melissa and Jonathan.
Yay, thank you. Should I start with reading, you think? Okay, let's do that. I think it's on. Okay. Don't believe anyone who tells you that death comes quick and painless. That's bullshit. Dying hurts like fuck all everything. You can feel all the pains, the hurts, the joys, the cries of all the world. There's no numbing dope, no dick wows, no kitty kitty yum yum, just a floodlight on all the world's needs. Death is a dump. You see it all. Kids, parents, teachers, the rats under the street that run through the sewers. Suck, suck, squeak, squeak. The pigeons that shit everywhere, the throwaways nobody else wants, the thugs, the queers, the hoes, the junkies, the brats, the fuck ups, the killers. Let me get this straight. The way I'm telling you any of this, I'm Aswang. And I know about the slow agonies of death because this body belonged to one of the throwaways, an 18-year-old girl named Rina who wound up murdered on a pig farm in a place called Port Coquitlam. Before I finished the tinikling, before I jumped into her body, before Marina found Willie on the corner of Main and Hastings, before the track marks on the insides of her knees and elbows, she lived a cleaner life. Before the late night diner trips where she saw, before falling into sleep, her mother's face, a face took up with large dark eyes reflecting the suspicion of others. She still hoped to be a pure spirit. Marina used to be 12. She used to live in a group home named for trees, 5 in a cottage out in the valley. She had the bottom bunk and Alex on top, too close to the popcorn ceiling plastered with CK1 ends torn out of fashion magazines. She used to look into people's dining rooms as she walked down the street. She put herself at one of those tables with roasted chicken and vegetables picked from the garden. Not mashed potatoes poured flaky out of a box like her ma used to make. Not carnation powdered milk mixed with water, though she did like to pick out the congealed lumps and feel them separate like pudding on her tongue. She used to do graffiti on government-issued desks, waiting for her name to be called. Marina used to stand around with teenage boys on the street corner, waiting for the light to change. She used to hitch rides through the valley and give strange men hand jobs for $20. Marina used to worry about gonorrhea and feel like she was the worst piece of living puck shit. And before all that, Marina used to be 5. She used to lie on her tummy, a thumb plunked in her mouth, index finger curled around her nose. And sometimes Mucha would come in and rub her back and tell her a story of a time long, long before. Marina used to leave a small music box outside in the rain, hoping to attract fairies. She used to practice kissing girls on the back of her hand or her own shoulder just to see what her skin tasted like. She used to get all squirmy and thrilled watching whodunits with her ma. She used to long for the ordinary. She used to live with Jess' ma, and they might have been poor, but they had a good time. Their homemade games were sometimes Rena running out to the garage behind the apartment building and picking up the water hose. She'd learned how to spray the water so it swished up toward the sky and back down like her own private waterfall. Then she ran around the apartment building shouting, "Bom, bay, bee, bo, boo," a pillowcase, her white wings tied around her neck. Her childlike chatter so candid and fresh. And right then she figured she was the luckiest girl alive.
Thank you for that beautiful reading, Melissa.
Thank you.
I first met Melissa at the University of Southern California, where we're both in the PhD program in creative writing and literature, dual program, where I sat many a class side by side, kind of something like this. But there is where I first encountered an opening excerpt from your novel.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I remember thinking, I think this was in Danzy Senna's workshop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking of the excerpt as an introduction to a novel that was one part gorgeously written true crime thriller and one part multi-generational supernatural revenge fantasy. And now that I've read it, actually I've read it a couple times over now, I realized it's somehow so much more than just those things. The novel begins with a death, with a murder, and with an introduction to the narrator, the Aswang, a spirit that takes us on a propulsive journey throughout the lives, and in some cases, the deaths of the unforgettable characters who populate the novel. It's a powerful opening, horrific, yet somehow rendered with beauty and grace, and readers will feel the pull of suspense as we wonder, will the murderer get away with this gruesome act? And will the Aswang fulfill her thirst for vengeance? And what led Marina in particular, and so many other women and girls like her, into the murderer's clutches? There's also a mission our protagonist, Marina, was on that Willie cut short. And we want to know what exactly was that mission, and whether the Aswang will take up the mission and be able to fulfill it. So I want to talk, there's so many elements that I want to talk to you today about, Melissa. I want to ask about this narrator, this Aswang. I want to talk about Willie Picton, about the character in the real life serial killer that he was based on. I want to talk about the aspect of the novel that I find myself most fascinated by, which is the fact that it's a coming of age novel, a coming of age story, largely told through and about the experiences of Marina Salas, but also including her love interest, Alex's experiences, and those of Marina's mother, Mutya, against the backdrop of colonialism, poverty, abuse, and sexual violence. And I want to talk about the love story between Rina and Alex. But first, I really just want to hear from you in terms of what was the catalyst, what sent you on the journey towards writing this book?
Yeah. So I think, like most young writers, this probably started as autofiction, and I was in a workshop. I was in the Tin House Summer Writers Workshop, and like I knew I needed a plot because it was mostly autofiction, and there was a person in front of me in the workshop, and she had the letters WP like handwritten on her ankle, and I was like, "What's that?" And she's like, "Oh, writing prompt." I was in a workshop earlier, and they said we need to do a writing prompt, and I said, "Oh, well, I thought it was for, I thought of Willie Picton automatically. I thought as soon as I'm finished with this book, I can't wait to write my book about Willie Picton. And so I realized like, oh, I could just smack a serial killer on my novel. And I went back to my room and I thought like, why wait until I finished with that one? And so I went back to my room and wrote all night and injected a plot. So yeah, I put a serial killer on it. But so that was the sort of initial nugget. Like the first scene I had written in this book that was the titular chapter, A Tiny Upward Shove. And so I had already, and I'm fortunate that my book has kept its title throughout all the 5 billions and billions of revisions. And so the initial image I had remained throughout.
The initial image of the beginning of the novel, or
Of the
the
tiny
tiny
upward
upward
shove
shove.
scene, yeah.
Is that something you think you could read for us today, or is that
I could.
a little bit too?
I could.
I actually I typed it out.
Oh, good.
I very much wanted you to read from that, because I think it's such a it's a beautifully illustrated scene. It's so imagistic. I believe it's on page 75.
Okay, good, thanks. I appreciate that.
And,
Yeah, I mean,
and I think it starts
oh,
right
good.
smack dab in the middle of the page.
Okay,
And I think it'd be really beautiful if you read from there through the end of the chapter, because I think
Okay.
that gives us that real feeling of what this title's about. And in a sense, it speaks to the larger project of the book.
okay, perfect. So yeah, this was the first scene I'd ever written that became the germ of this book. And what you need to know is that so our protagonist is named Marina, and their family also often refers to her as Reen or Rina, and the mother's name is Mucha, and they are living in her Lola's house, her grandmother's house and right now Marina's waiting for Mucha to take her to the beach with her new boyfriend. So she's waiting in the garage. She likes to play in the garage and look at her grandmother's her grandmother has all these MREs, like meals ready to eat in the garage, and she likes to just like look at them and play with them. Mucha came into the garage. Reen, you ready? Her mascara made her eyelids look heavy, like one of those flappers on the edge of sleep. She sounded irritated. She was fine in her purple island dress, a small wraparound with a bamboo print across her chest and over her shoulder. She wore espadrilles and her hair in a tight dark braid. Her hair was the blackest black. Marina sat on the floor beside the heater. Mucha's voice came as a surprise. For a moment, Marina tried to absorb the idea that it was just the two of them in the garage. It seemed so long ago that they were alone. Ma sat there twinkling like a gerbil, covered in glitter. Ma, look, it's stuck. There's a bird stuck in the water heater. Ma sighed, took irritated steps down the stairs and went over to the heater. Reen, forget it. It won't come out. Why? It doesn't want to. This is the water heater. It's warm in there. I want her to come out, Marina cried, her face scrunched up, her finger extended so the bird could step on it. Ma sighed and grabbed the bird around its tail feathers, the bird's scarlet clove chest pushing against the pipe, its little bird heart on overdrive. Ma tried to pull it down. Marina watched, focused, shut her eyes. Nothing. Nothing. The grabbable parts of the bird were stuck tight and Ma couldn't get a good grip on it. The bird was squawking like crazy. It tried to move its wings, but it was trapped in the shape of a missile. Well, there's only one more way to go if you can't go down. Ma made her hand into a small fist and gave the bird a tight sock to its feet. The bird shoved up into the back drum part of the heater. There was a snap, a crunching of bones. The bird fell onto the floor. Its legs snapped off. It fell on its side with a bent wing. It fluttered around in quick, loud circles. Then it stopped. Now clean that up and let's get going. Mike is going to be here any second. Marina looked into the bird's dark, glassy eyes. It looked like a statue. What'd you do? She asked, her voice shaky. Just what we have to do, sweetie. Help a hurt thing on its way. A tiny upward shove.
Thank you. I that image, it's so powerful, and it speaks to the relationships, so many relationship dynamics throughout the book, I think, in terms of helping that's also at times fatal or hurting or hurtful. And you said, I mean, I was so curious about at what point you just answered this question before you read, but what point in the construction of the entire book you kind of came up with that? And is there anything more you could say about, was that just a scene you had in your mind, or was it easy to connect that? Because remember, this is a book in which we have a serial killer at large. We see what's going on with how he's stalking his victims. We're learning so much about Marina and what happens in her grandmother's house and Lola's house, what's happening to her in a group home. And I don't know, you found such a wonderful way of kind of distilling what's going on in such a way that it's like so connected, and yet it's so, I don't know, kind of one of a kind in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to talk about like multiple breakdowns in the child welfare system and economic violence and physical violence. And but I also really wanted to capture like these slow forms of killing. And so I felt like that the best way to do that would be through these intimate relationships between this mother, this grandmother, and this young woman. And then the Aswang is this figure in Filipino folklore who, like, depending on where you're from, she could be a shapeshifter, or she could be a vampire, or like, God forbid, she's a spinster, you know, a woman who lives alone. But if you're a woman who lives alone, you could be the Aswang. And if you misbehave, oftentimes, you know, people will say like, you better behave or Aswang will get you. And so she's similar to like La Llorona, but really she's just like, she's an invention of colonialism, right? And so I think that this was my way of getting her to, like, you know, to take it back for the Aswang, because really I feel like she's like this badass, like trans-Pacific intersectional feminist. And so this is my attempt at the trans-Pacific intersectional feminist thriller.
The Aswang is such an amazing vehicle through which we are able to hop into different characters' perspectives and minds. We're able to also move through time in a really interesting way. We move through the life of Marina from her earlier childhood into moving into her mid-teenage years. But we also go back as far as, I believe, 6 generations to the first family member, her first ancestor who became Aswang. And so I found that really interesting. When did you first become aware of both that myth, but then also like, when did you know that that was something that you wanted to be a part of this book and this narration style?
Yeah, well, I mean, I always knew I wanted to utilize the Aswang, and I wanted to, as I mentioned in my bio, like I reported on this rather, I was also, while I was writing this book, for part of the time I was writing this book, I was reporting on this really harrowing case on the child welfare system. And I remember sitting in on that trial, and the parents in that case, there were multiple breakdowns with the DCFS case and with the reporting and the social workers. But when both of the parents got sentenced, life in prison and the death penalty respectively, and like everybody in the gallery like cheered, I knew my larger project was going to be like troubling our ideas of justice, and I wanted a more complicated means of troubling that idea of justice. And I've you know, I remember hearing long ago, like Toni Morrison had said something about like the one power people have, and the one power people will always have regardless of your agency, is the power to bestow mercy, you know. And so I knew that mercy was going to be a big part of this text. And I felt like the Aswang was like a really good vehicle for that, to trouble our ideas of both justice and mercy. And but I didn't know how, like I didn't know how to do it. I think that's why I was in edits for so long on this novel. Like I was like, my editor would be like, well, but how is she like popping into people's minds? And I was like, because she's the Aswang. But I had to like really break down the mechanics of it. And that was what most of my work was cut out for me.
And you really see the idea of mercy, or the troubling of justice, I should say, across the different generations when we're first seeing the family members who come into contact with Aswang, or in a sense become Aswang. You mentioned the work that you were doing, and as a journalist, I'm certain you had so much information at hand in terms of the child welfare system. I'm curious about what research went into Willie Picton, though, the serial killer, because there was a certain part or a certain point, I should say, in my reading where I was 3/4 of the way through, and this character was just becoming so real to me in so many ways. And I stopped and I said, hold on, I really need to, and this is all, this is all because of the work that you did on the page. But I had to know, is this a real person, a real historical figure? And I looked him up, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time. But something that immediately struck me when I kind of looked at the reportage of the cases is how flat all of his victims, the lives of the victims were portrayed through the reportage. And then obviously, he is portrayed in this way that's, he is monstrous. But there's something you do on the page that you jump into the history of his upbringing. And so many of the characters, pretty much all of the characters in the novel. And I was curious about how important that was to you to, particularly thinking about Willie, and how important was it to you to make him, humanized, I guess, when it's so easy to skip that part, I think.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad you got like the actual, you didn't get the galley, but you got the actual hard copy version, because there's a coda in the back, which you don't normally see that in a novel, which is like, sort of an explainer about Picton and his victims, and trying to encourage people to learn more about the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. But, one time I used to teach journalism at LMU, like an immersive journalism class at LMU. And I would take, which just meant that I would take my students all over the place. I highly recommend engaged learning, and so I took my students to the Twin Towers jail downtown as part of like their immersive journalism practice. And a lot of the deputies who were giving us the tour, like, had quite a different worldview than I do. They very much subscribed to carceral justice, and they definitely were like, this is our tax dollars at work, and they would take us to different, the jail is set up so that like the gay inmates are in their own pod, and then the rest are based on their crimes or their mental health. And I even recall like the guy who was giving us the tour saying like, our tax dollars are paying for these guys, the trans inmates who needed their medication. And he was like, some of these guys have better tits than my wife. And I was just like, just disgusted and appalled by what they were saying to my students. But, and afterwards, in my office, when my student came up to me and said like, how do you deal with that? Like, as a journalist, when you're reporting, like, how do you deal with it when people have like a different worldview than you do? And at the time, my wife, who happens to be a deputy, had just texted me at that moment, and her job was to sit with inmates in the hospital, and one of the inmates was dying, and her job at that moment was to hold her hand and let her know that she would be released because she was dying. And did she want anybody to call or anybody to talk to? And so I showed that text to my student, and I said, like, the truth is the most interesting story, but the truth is very complicated. And I think that's like a very long way to say, like, it would be great if there were just like terrible people and good people.
Right.
It would be so easy, and we could just get rid of all the shitty people. But like, I knew I had to fully develop this character, so yeah.
And was like heavily researching that part of that, or was it, because I can also imagine, so
Yeah. I mean, and that also, I have to say, like, I do enjoy research. like that's like that's the journalist in me does enjoy like that. It lights up a different part of my brain. And so I did was heavily steeped. And like I said, when I saw that WP on that woman's ankle, I was like, I can't wait to write my Willie Picton book. I thought that I was just gonna like write a whole like, fictional account of Willie Picton's life. So I did a lot of research. I have Stevie Cameron's book and research on the farm to thank for that. And I think that she is coming up with a follow-up with the point of view from the victims' families and stuff. But that was a very helpful resource. But I did a lot of serial killer. I mean, sometimes research took me to super dark places and I needed to do something else.
Imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, kind of related, the violence and the assaults and the sexual assaults,
Mhm.
and even some descriptions of mutilation is quite graphic, I think, in the book. And I was curious if that was something that was a bit more of a writerly instinct to, capture detail in great specificity, or if that was something you had at any point thought of looking away, because the narrative lens does not, I don't think it ever really looks away from the violence or the outcomes, what happens after the violence. Was that just, you thought it needed to be portrayed as it is, or?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think it's an aesthetic choice, but I'm one to look, I just assume that terrible shit is happening all the time and I want to know about it, and like there are people doing bad things and I want to know about it. And so yes, I chose to keep it in, but and especially because I was telling it from the point of view of the Aswang, which is like, she's survived 7 generations, like she survived colonialism, like she survived like the most hardcore versions of violence. So I felt like this would be no big deal.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Why would the Aswang?
Like,
that makes perfect sense. I was also thinking about, so paraphrase what you said earlier, like a quieter violence that you're interested in, or
like the slower forms of killing.
Forms of killing. Something. There's a list that Marina, our protagonist, her grandmother, Lola gives her a list when she turns 5. And it's the list for how to move through the world. I wondered if you would mind reading.
Oh, no, that's
list.
okay. Yeah.
I think you can get through the whole list, but if you feel like some of the list, it's on page 83.
Okay. It's very, it's reminiscent of Girl, right?
Yes.
It
Struck me as something growing up. The teenage girls I knew, and even in my early 20s, the women I dated would always kind of give me the list of what their grandmothers or their mothers gave them.
Yeah, it's so wild to think like everything is like will either make you bad or slutty or lead to your demise. But yeah, okay. When Marina was 5, Lola wrote a list of how to be. When you're sent to run an errand, put extra powder under your arms. You don't want to smell like a no-no girl or a poor person. Use bleaching cream on your dark skin. Keep it covered in the sun and try to stay inside as much as possible to avoid getting too dark. If your nose becomes flat, sleep with a clothespin attached to the bridge. For anyone already 12 years or older, I'm afraid it is too late, but sometimes you can do this on the night before a big date. I heard it worked for Loi Loi, and now she's happily married and only her first child came out with a flat nose, but the rest have ears that stick out too far. If in time you have ears that stick out, you can stick them back with Scotch tape. Learn to play the piano and to sing songs. The songs you sing should be full of heart and pride, and you should not sing anything you cannot sing in front of your suitors Lola or Lolo, because dead or alive, they will be watching you. Never shave above your knees, or everyone will think you're a whore. Never use deodorant, or everyone will think you're a puta. Pray the rosary daily. Always use pork when you cook. Pork is a seasoning. Never make dry rice. Measure the rice by placing your index finger in the middle of the pan. The water should rise to the first creased line in your index finger. Never water down the peanut sauce in kare kare, and always pick a fat pig for lechon. People will think you are cheap and lazy if you take shortcuts. If you wear too much makeup, people will think you're a bakla man pretending to be a woman. If you're invited to eat at his house, eat everything you're offered and compliment the cook. If they give you the head of the fish, smile and eat around it, but no, they do not like you for their son. Remember not to leave any meat on any bones, or they will think you are rude or picky. When you're talking to your man, try to flip your hair around when you laugh like white girls do. It is best to date a man at least 10 years older than you so he can take care of you. It is best to date an American man, and even better if he is white. Try to find an army man or a cop, someone with a uniform. Enter the room of your suitor's mother, even if it smells like the toxic smoke of mosquito repellent incense. Don't tell her it doesn't work. All her hopes are hanging on this. When you're served food, watch how they eat. If they eat with their hands, eat with yours. If they eat with a fork, still eat with your hands. This is something we do that is like prayer, like saying thank you for my food. Don't ever be too ashamed to eat with your hands, unless you're in a restaurant. But true clean women hardly eat at all in public. Don't be intimidated if the mother of your suitor refers to him as a gift from God. But if he is her only son, smile politely and find another boyfriend. He will never have enough time for you. Never marry a man whose mother is a yaya. You'll never be able to clean as good as her. He will be jealous of the children she raised instead of him. You will be resentful of her constant emotional presence in your marriage. If you don't like something someone says, smile very big. They will understand your disapproval. Never marry an igorot. They eat dog meat. Insist the man pay the check or he will think you're a whore. Be a good Catholic and practice your handwriting. There is only one magic word that matters. Mawaka, Rina girl, mercy.
Thank you for reading that. I love the fact that the list is as extensive as it is, because you get that sense that everything she does comes at great risk in a sense. She either does it right or does it wrong. And part of that risk, a large part of that risk appears to be mating options, basically, romantic options, who is going to accept her as good enough within a particular family. And it brings me to the kind of love story that is in this, or as I see it, as a love story, this relationship with Marina and Alex in the book. Can you, at what point, I'm curious what point Alex appeared in your imagination when you were constructing this book?
Yeah. I mean, I joke because it's like there's a serial killer and there's like this Aswang and but like at the heart of it, at the center of it, it's like a really sweet queer love story, you know. And I think you did need something to propel her forward, you know, like you needed something for the reader. The reader needed something to hold on to too, I think, because there is so much. It seemed very likely that she, having entered foster care, that she would encounter sex work and physical violence and sexual violence and economic violence. Like all of those things seemed super likely. But you know, from the very beginning, the Aswang enters this, is in this family line, and for the level of seven generations, and she has to then finish what she started, in order to rid the Aswang of the family line. So in this case, she needed something to propel her forward, and what she was on the hunt for Alex's foster mother, who was like a very loving and kind person. So I think that we just needed some touchstone, like we needed something to look forward to, I think.
And Alex's adoptive mother seems to be also a great counterbalance, I think, to there's a lot of love that is in a sense dangerous, and it's complicated. And I love that it's complicated at every turn throughout the novel. Sabina seems to be, maybe because this is Alex, the romantic partner character's adoptive mother, who has her for a certain amount of time, and it almost seems like because that time is limited, that motherhood is allowed to stay so pure, and maybe it would have stayed pure beyond that, but I think it's a really interesting counterbalance to some of what we're seeing, because even Marina's mother, for any of her shortcomings in the book, we have to look at what Lola Vergy, how she raised her, and this kind of lineage of at times a kind of neglect and a kind of abuse.
Yeah, there's like so much maternal loss and longing along the side, and I think that that's something that I'm very interested in. I think
I believe I've heard you say, and I've read that, like myself, it took you quite a while to usher this book out into the world. If you don't mind.
I think it took me way longer than you, but I don't know. Okay.
How many administrations?
Yeah, exactly. I know what present. That's a good thing to think about. Yeah, it took me from contract like 7 years. I was in edits for.
From contract.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I imagine there was some time before contract. Right?
Yeah, there was definitely plenty of time before contract, but like I think when you sell a book to a publisher, oftentimes, well, what I ended up doing, and I maybe won't ever do again, is you'll post on like social media the publisher's marketplace announcement, like, I sold my book, and then like proceeded to not be able to go to like any literary events or parties for the next 7 years. So yeah, I was in edits for 7 years. I mean, there were like a lot of intervening factors with my editor changed publishers, but
yeah,
that accounts for about 6 months of those.
Gotcha. Well, the reason I asked those is not to put you like on the spot. I mean, I wrote for many years, and when I think my version of that story is getting with my agent around 2016, and thinking, oh, we're gonna have this thing sold in like 3 months tops, and it was maybe 5 years after that, but I'd already been working on the book 5 years prior to that. So what I'm curious about is how working on a project over the course of that amount of time, in which there are so many political shifts, there are so many cultural shifts, these big moments. I remember working on my book talks about identity a lot and race a lot, and thinking about being in President Obama years. And I thought, this gives me a real opportunity there was so much optimism, and we had this biracial Black president, and I was going to be able to like talk about these really, really, really nuanced aspects of Blackness. And then I remember like midway through, I mean, from the beginning probably, but 2016 happens, Trump's in office, and I was noticing my own work actually becoming like less nuanced. It was like not unintentionally, intentionally, like I need to scream about this stuff. I need to yell it. We're all screaming. We're all screaming at each other. But
it was all like hopey changing, and then it was like, get out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. To at times despair, but and then we round a little bit. Anyway, we round that corner, and then we have these big social movements like Me Too. We have the so-called racial reckoning of 2020, if you believe it, depending on what you think of that. So I'm just curious, did you notice yourself maybe having new angles or new kind of focuses or things you wanted to emphasize as you revised across that amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I was a different person for sure by the time the novel was over. And then there were also just different aesthetic choices that were being made in that time frame. Like I think their very first draft of this had like all those like footnote thingies, like all the footnotes with all this, and like that trend changed, and like no quotation marks in dialogue. Like there's just different decision choices writers made at that after by the time this came out. So yeah, but I'm a different person than I was when I started it. And I think, but I luckily like the initial nugget were like timeless concepts, like mercy was something that I became even ever more interested in. I was all throughout all of that, I was always troubling like power and agency around the different movements and stuff. So in that case, those three the same.
The book to me, in terms of my frame of reference, the library of my mind, it seems so original,
Mhm.
and it seems just like a kind of marvel that I'm curious to know if you have particular influences who are maybe your guides along the way, or if you had other, because sometimes I'm influenced, but it doesn't seem to have like this direct link to what I'm writing. I'm sure it does in a kind of subconscious way, but then there are the books I know for a fact my book is in conversation with in terms of the themes that I'm interested in exploring. And I'm curious if there were any of those books that you felt like your work was in conversation with throughout the process.
I would definitely say Beloved. Like that was like, because it starts with a death, but or it starts with a life, depending on how you look at it. So I would definitely say Beloved was a strong influence. And then strangely enough, like Joyce Carol Oates is like a strong voice influence for me, like language wise. I think I do some of the same moves that she does. But yeah, we got some of the same dance moves, but that's it.
Well, one thing I think about when you say moves, I think about the structure of the book. I mean, you all heard from the beginning of the book what that's like, where we're going from this talk about the Marina's death in a sense into this feeling like this retraction, moving back towards feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. And there are so many really interesting moves you make with the Aswang making decisions about revenge, about taking Willie out, about protecting people from Willie, but also this movement towards really learning who Marina is or was, and how she might have wound up on a pig farm in Willie's trailer. And I was just curious, is that something you again like thought about? Is there a name for the structure you came up with? Were you just writing from the gut?
Right. Well, that was the hardest part of this book. Like that was mostly the 7 years. Like my one note my editor gave me at the very beginning that I'll always remember. She's like, it's like you're a bodybuilder, but with no skeleton. Like I had like really juicy muscles, but no skeleton. And I had to build the skeleton. And this is like I guess maybe an argument for outlining, but I don't know if I'm convinced still of being an outliner. I'm just not one. I like to write and then outline later. But and then I end up with kind of a complicated structure, which is that there's the fictive present, which is the Aswang, and then there's then you go back to how she got to be where she was. So it starts, the first sentence is she's dead, and then you go back to figure out how she died, and then but through it all is the fictive present, which is from the point of view of the Aswang.
Right, and they both work as great
Like
senses of like suspense, because you want to know like how did this happen in the first place, and then what's going to happen now, and they're crossing each other in these really wonderful ways. I think we're at a point where we can take some questions from the audience.
That would be fun. Yes.
Not to harp on the 7 years
It's
at all.
It's okay.
But I'm often very impressed when people, especially debut writers, take that long with the first book, because I think it takes a lot of conviction, because there is so many reasons to rush, and there's so many people kind of pushing you to get the book out. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Like what you kind of held on to, how you sort of trusted your vision?
Oh, I didn't trust anything. Like I was terrified. I didn't know if I was good enough to write this book. I don't know if I didn't have enough artistic integrity and I was just writing whatever my editor wanted me to write. Like I was scared. I mean, in part of that 7 years, I like got sober. I like, I blew up my life and I moved out by myself and then I got sober. And I mean, there was like a lot of other stuff happening, which is like wrapped around like, am I good enough? Is this what I want to write? And so I didn't know. And every time a milestone passes, it's like they have all these awards in publishing, like the best under 35 and and I'm like, fuck, man, I didn't get that one. And every new year it would be like just another year that my book did not come out. But I am nothing I've ever wanted has ever happened on my time frame. Everything that I've always really wanted has come slow and on its own time frame, and yet it's still at just the exact right time. Had I come out and debuted in the midst of the pandemic, would have been really difficult. I mean, we're still going on, but I mean, it's a different scenario today than it was a couple of years ago. So, I just think like I have to like let go of all that stuff, but it wasn't even by choice that to let go of all that stuff. So I was scared for much of that time. And I didn't know if I was capable of writing this book. And it's so much better than it was. I'm so embarrassed when I look at the first draft from 7 years ago. And the way my editor had explained it was like, just think of this as the type of feedback you would have gotten if you workshopped it all these 7 years. Like she took it at a state when it was like really early days. And she just believed in it enough that she could get me there. So I'm lucky that in a sense that happened.
And that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
Part of my brain's still stuck on the thinking about, looking at every New Year's and thinking,
Yeah.
I used to make threats to myself about throwing myself out of the window. It's gonna be like the first floor, but it would have been like really rough.
You would have had to walk with a cane.
Yeah, for like a week. But I think it might be helpful for people who are here or listening. What was that initial, like, did you have an agent or did you, so your agent got you to this editor and then working with the editor?
I had an agent, and similar to your agent, she definitely did a couple runs with me first before she sent it out to market. Like she wanted to make sure it was like ready to sent out to market. So I kind of thought by the time she sent it out to market that it was like ready to go. I didn't realize that then my editor would also want to go through edits. But so I had an agent, and I went to, when it was out to market, I went to Bread Loaf Summer Writers Workshop, and I was planning on meeting with 2 editors there, where you do this terrible thing where you have to stand in front of somebody and pitch them your book for 5 minutes, and there's like a line behind you of other hopefuls, like all in this barn, and luckily for me, I got on the plane, and seated right beside me was the editor that I was going to pitch in a barn in Bread Loaf. And so I just pitched her on the plane the whole way there, which could have been like, that could have gone really bad, that could have gone really awful. By the time, what?
You just launched in, or how did that?
Yeah.
First, or?
Yeah, right. I said, this was like the scary part, because I'm like, hey, are you Jenna Johnson? And she's like, I am, and I'm like, oh, well, hi, I'm Melissa. And then I just talked to her about, I was organizing airport workers at the time, and we were on a plane. So I got to talk to her about the working conditions of airport workers. And I was like, just talking to her about my life and my job. And then there was an ad for, there's a drink that like, there was a movie about people who ate people. And then there was like a drink named after that same, I don't remember, but anyways, it was really creepy. She was like, did you see that ad? Because like, there's a movie about people who eat people that's named that. Anyway, so we we talked about that. And then I said, oh, people who eat people. Well, I'm writing a book from the point of view of the Oswang, you know? And she was like, that's so strange. I just saw a documentary about the Oswang, and that, like, never in a million years would I would think this, you know, person just watched a document, like knew anything at all about the Oswang. And so by the time we landed, she requested my manuscript from my agent. And that's how that worked.
Okay. Any other questions?
She never has taken that flight again. She said she's never since. Are there questions on the machine? Okay.
What do
Hi.
you hope that the reader takes away from having read your book?
What do I hope the reader takes away from having read my book? I hope that they also trouble our ideas of justice and mercy.
Do you feel like that's in your head when you're writing, or are you writing more for yourself in the moment?
I think it starts with, sometimes I start with an idea or a question, and then I write towards that idea or question. So yeah. Alrighty.
I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure I met your editor at Red.
You did. You had to do the scary thing though, where you're like waiting
Yeah.
in line, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they put a lot of pressure on you to like cut the people in front of you off so they don't take your, and then that sets you up to have that editor really not like you if you actually do that.
Yeah, it's like those reality dating shows where they're like, can I take you away for a minute? And the person who's sitting there is like, but I was just talking to him. It's like that. I watch a lot of reality TV. Sorry.
Did you continue doing like summer conferences after you had kind of you had that in the bag, you had an airplane pitch like that?
I had it in the bag, and then yes, I did. But then it's scary. Once you have an editor, you don't want to have too many other eyes or ears on it. But then at the same time, I was so scared of like, you know, failing her that I thrive from feedback, but I do also sometimes have the problem of like incorporating too much feedback, like just taking a short survey of what everybody thinks, so that if it goes wrong, I could be like, but you told me to rewrite the scene that way. So, but I did at her recommendation. So from then on, I only went to conferences at her recommendation. Like I went to Aspen and did a novel length workshop.
Aspen
And so,
Works.
yeah, because I got the scholarship or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, as did you.
As
We
did
just
I.
sang, we
did.
did the same things.
We're at the same place for like
Yeah.
different time periods.
Uh-huh.
And USC, because
Mhm.
again, where I started was that I'd seen an excerpt of this in a workshop. I'm wondering about the academic side. So that degree we take,
Oh, yeah.
creative, or we did when we were taking coursework, we take workshops,
Mhm.
creative writing workshops in different genres, but then there's also the critical side,
Mhm.
which Melissa just passed her exam. She's ABD.
ABD.
All but dissertations, so I feel like you don't have to talk to them anymore, like the professors. You're like,
Yeah, I could spend all my time
For a while.
watching television.
Yeah.
Um,
But did you find that critical work? Because
mhm.
also winding up in those classes that counted as critical classes, some of your research would show, or your research interest, and I'm wondering what it was like, knowing that you have this novel, it's under contract, you're workshopping the creative aspect of it. Were you still focusing on kind of that more academic side and bringing that right back to the book, or are you keeping that kind of separate from your creative life here?
Well, I mean, I think no matter whether I'm doing critical work or creative work, like I'm always going to be troubling that original wound, so there's going to be some stuff that you see as a through line in all of my work. But I think that I was able to engage in a certain like level of discourse and thinking about like, what am I doing and why am I doing it going forth, especially when it comes to my nonfiction. I think the best gift I got from going to school is, I mean, although I do write for money because I don't get a lot of money from school, but the best gift I got was to actually like not have so much pressure to like hang out with the hot take and just like be able to actually sit with ideas and be introduced to other writers and ideas around more things like, what is a literature of witnessing, and like, what am I doing as when I'm looking at things or writing about things, because I'm there as a nonfiction fellow. So I definitely am cognizant of those things when it comes to like my journalism and things.
Have you, during the time of the books out in the world, I find it super obnoxious that I'm gonna ask the question about like thinking of other projects, but I'm just curious more,
Right, yeah.
not like what's your next thing, but as a nonfiction writer as well, like have you had concurrent ideas or projects that are in the works?
I know what my next thing is.
You do?
Yeah, well, because I have to do it now. That's the D in the ABD.
Oh, right.
But I have had like the last 10 years of case records of children who have child fatalities within the foster care system in LA County. And so I've been like, what do I do with these case records? Like they're heavily redacted, and what can I do? So first I tried unredacting them and that didn't really work. And then I tried like a contrapuntal reading of the redactions, like sort of switching the gaze, and like that wasn't really satisfying. And then one day, like very soon after the shelter in place order, first that Netflix docu-series came out, and like it seemed like everybody was talking about this thing I care about so much that's very difficult to talk about. And then we got the shelter in place order, so it was like, who turned out all the lights, but I remember walking in the woods and it was snowing and I was listening to a fairy tale and walking my dog, and then I thought, oh my God, fairy tales, like for some reason people can engage these narratives in fairy tales that they can't in necropolitical narratives and fairy tales. Like the whole history of fairy tales is about filicide and infanticide and people killing their children. And so I am translating, because enchantment, I think, offers this space for wonderment and like kind of turns off our critical space. So I'm translating these case records to fairy tale. That's my dissertation project.
Wow. There's also you get to see redacted part of a case file in
this
the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I wasn't expecting. That it's, and the characters are talking about what they're seeing, but there's something about seeing it yourself. It just feels so real. These characters become so real because of all of these interesting like typographical decisions that you made. And I just want to congratulate you on a great book.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Yay. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and talent. I'm so glad that you could join us. And thank you all for joining us here in person and out there on the internet. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you can purchase Melissa's novel here at Green Apple Books, either through the internet or in person. You can also pre-order Jonathan's book. We have plenty of books. So thank you again for joining us here, and make yourselves comfortable, and we'll see you next time.
Yay.